Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thank you so much again for joining me here. I hope you're having a phenomenal day. We're taking a quick look here at Bitcoin, just getting a quick crypto market overview. Obviously taking a look at some key support and resistance levels, specifically with XRP has its solid support at $3. We're going to discuss that. SUI is potentially retesting its ascending trend, entering its support range between 360 and 380. Solana too, we got to talk about this as well. We're potentially losing our ascending trend line. That's generally unfavorable. Doesn't mean you flip short, but it just kind of implies we may see further downside. And obviously, as per usual, Ethereum kind of rocking steady here in the low 3,700 range. That previous high working as a new low. So we're going to discuss all that. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and start really quick with some ETF net inflow. And we can see we had a lot less inflows from ETFs on Ethereum versus Bitcoin. So that doesn't necessarily mean anything bad. It just kind of implies that more money is flowing into Bitcoin, money's going into stable coins, and essentially away from altcoins. So those dips are not being bought as strong as they should be. We'll look at crypto market dominance as well here shortly, just to kind of get perspective on that. But let's quickly note as well here from derivatives, we do see a slight increase in open interest, which is fairly favorable on the back end. Fear and greed index is dissipating, which is actually very good because Bitcoin's still maintaining its range. And as it continues to range bound and fear and greed index pulls back, similar to RSI, that gives us that consistency in the sense that people want to buy this dip. Okay, so it's going to be good for Bitcoin, and obviously altcoins will follow that eventually. And we take a look here. Still in good shape as well. I don't think we should run for the hills per se, based on the simple fact that we're in the upper 30s on alt season index. This doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. It's just a good representation of how well altcoins are doing versus Bitcoin. And we can see there's a lot more profitable coins versus less profitable coins, depending on the ones you're investing in here. Obviously, you want to be careful, but there are some pretty good ones here still front running Bitcoin, consistent with Ethereum too. Okay, so those are kind of like the back end things we want to kind of recognize. We do want to take a look here for starters with open interest, liquidation, etc. So let's just quickly recognize this. From a liquidation standpoint, we can also understand here really quick. First of all, open interest, let's talk about that. I like to work my way from right to left. And we can see solid amount of support, 115.5. That's just that previous open interest range. People bought the heck out of that dip. For right now, though, we're kind of in a lower range of support. 117.3 is that technical open interest support range. We can see we're at break even here for liquidation long delta, basically implying that we have just as many longs as we do shorts. That's typically either a transition or just an indecision moment. What we're going to be looking for is doji candles on the chart to see if there's any indication of reversal. Furthermore, too, this is the last 3 days worth of look back, and we can see that majority of all liquidation has been pretty well swept. Let's go ahead and refresh this and see. Yeah, most everything here locally has been hit. There's a small chunk at about 116,000, but I think the likelihood of that is fairly low at this point because I think 117 is heavily guarded. We discussed that yesterday. We'll reiterate that here today, but on the left-hand side, we're looking at the net longs versus net shorts. So right now we can see on the left, these are the longs that are tentatively underwater. 118,200 is that local area of concentration, and we can see shorts as well. Shorts are heavy at 117.3. Why they're shorting the bottom, I don't know, but that's typical for a lot of traders. Unfortunately, they're basically breakout traders or breakdown traders in this case here, trying to short the bottom. You don't short support, you short when the support level is broken and retested as a resistance. That's the concept there. This is pretty much an irrelevant chart for the moment because this is just kind of telling us where we have the most averaged amount of positions, both longs and shorts. I'll probably end up getting rid of that at some point because that it can give us a lot of false positives. So what we want to look at here with Bitcoin before we jump into the Bitcoin chart is to kind of understand here where we're at here. We're going to start with total 3. This excludes Bitcoin, Ethereum, and stablecoins. Kind of just gives us a representation of where altcoins are at. And from a macro perspective, they are pulling back, but also maintaining a range, right? So we got this pretty significant $700 to $800 billion range. That's a pretty significant amount, right? Or 800. I forget the specific numbers, but the general consensus here is that we're ranging, right? I'll actually pull up the percentage on that one instead moving forward, but this one's a better way to represent kind of where we're at here with stable coins. We take a look here. While it's, when we saw the price of Bitcoin and altcoins going up, we saw a significant decrease in stable coins. Basically, people are just spending their fiat, right? At this point, though, we can see it kind of slowly starting to increase. That is an early sign kind of letting us know that we see dips in altcoin behavior. Basically, money flows away from Bitcoin and altcoins, goes into stable coins, and inevitably goes into Bitcoin and then altcoins secondary to that. So that's kind of where we're at there. And if we look at that and we compare that with Bitcoin dominance, it's a very similar chart. Okay, oftentimes those run concurrent in a lot of ways, which puts us in a position right now where we're seeing Bitcoin dominance going sideways and up a little bit. We can recognize that the price of Bitcoin goes up, alts might go down. Okay, so if what we're hoping for right now is altcoin dominance Bitcoin dominance go kind of sideways and then down, which is inevitable here at this point, I feel, but we're still honoring our ascending trend. So it makes sense as to why altcoins are kind of getting stunted out right now. So that's kind of where we're at there. Now, to look at the Bitcoin chart, let's just go ahead and we talked about the daily yesterday, but just kind of to reiterate, we still have a fair value gap as low as 112, even as low as 110,000 for some areas of support based on open interest previously. So just, absolute worst case scenario, 112,000, I think, is probably the likely bottom for us if we see that. Now we have a CME gap that still hasn't been fully filled yet. That's between 115.7 and 114.4. But the overall concept here is that we're still doing pretty well. However, we just lost our 20-day SMA. I don't really buy into that too much. Some people, take that and just run with it. I think that it's just kind of an early indication in the simple fact that we're ranging so well right now that it's, even though it could be an indication of a reversal, I think the fact of the matter is until we lose 116,000, we don't need to run for the hills. Even if that does happen, I don't think we should short into that. I think that's a bad idea. We got tons of support in the current area. So just be careful kind of, diving headfirst into one single indicator. If everything else is combining itself with the opposite of what you feel or you see in that one indicator, it's probably not worth taking a trade, right? Some people highly value Elliott wave, for example. They like to have 50 different possibilities. I prefer to take those possibilities, average them out, and give me a sense of direction. And that's what we're doing here. I mean, the back-end data doesn't look too bad. Things are overall pretty strong here in the overall sentiment. Our local point of control is 118,000, so we do want to kind of close above that level. In fact, this is one thing to note on the daily. We didn't have a bearish engulfing candle. We actually closed without one. So that's a good sign in the sense that the bears did not completely, control that 24-hour period. Well, technically they did. They didn't compare to the previous period, so it shows that there's a little more strength there. We're probably just seeing this natural sell-off here and working ourselves into a nice type of flag pattern as well. So while this is never perfect or exact, we could very well see the price action continue higher and bounce from here. So we'll talk about this more later, but for now, that's kind of the general premise here for Bitcoin. Let's move on to Ethereum because this is like the next big front runner here kind of for altcoins. See kind of where we're at. Let's go ahead and start with the back-end liquidation data first and just kind of recognize where we're at here. So when it comes to Ethereum, I like to kind of pay attention to liquidation delta, but also open interest. So let's go ahead and zoom in here and see 3750 is supposed that 3700 to 3750 is supposed to be that support range for us. So we're currently testing that right now. We're right in the middle of that. So we have the most amount of interest there locally outside of 3650. So just know if we lose 3700, 3650 would be a good secondary consideration for a long and or just averaging into a position on the way down. Because Ethereum is still very strong. Even though we see a slight tapering effect on ETF net inflow, it's still remaining high. More money's flowing into traditional markets, and that's a good sign. If we take a look here at open interest, or rather, this is liquidation long versus short delta. We have shifted a little bit. Let me refresh this here. Yeah, we're still slightly low, but this is nothing. Honestly, this is almost break even. When you look at it, it's only 50,000. We see Ethereum upwards of 10, 20, 30 billion in some cases. So the amount of volume there is kind of flattening out, so to speak, which generally can be construed as a reversal, but it's also a simple sign here that we're sweeping this lower area of liquidation. So we saw a little sweep there to 3,700. There's still some left at 3,690, but outside of that, 3,500 is the next significant pocket. So if we do see any more legs down, I think one more leg down would be worst case to about that upper 3,600 range. So let's look at the charts and kind of see how that works for us. And generally construing here the daily time frame is positive. It's easy to interpret it positively, mainly because we're above our ascending trend lines here. We're still technically over 70 on the RSI, so it's very normal for the price action to kind of cool off and go sideways. I think we may actually be maybe stuck in a range for a little while before we see another breakout. But the key takeaway here is that stochastic's pulling back, the price is going sideways. That gives us that natural bullish type of shift pattern. Now, once more, our previous high working as a new low here at about 37.50, that should hold. And it is truthful. Yes, we do see a MACD divergence, but if you've ever studied MACD, I actually have too. I've ran quite a few analysis, or just kind of some tests, if you will, on the success rate of the MACD, and it's actually fairly low when used by itself. So a daily MACD divergence, cool, all right, that's fine. But everything else is looking good. We have good inflow. We've got a lot of volume in this current range, and technically we're in pretty solid shape. So if we take a look at the volume in this range here on the 4-hour, basically since we've been about 35.50 or higher, we see the most amount of volume at the current range, 37.50, secondary to that 3600. And we also have open interest at 36.50. So there's a ton of volume here. I think the odds of losing this range is fairly low, but once more, anything could happen, right? You never truly know. And there are some patterns here we could kind of extract and kind of be like, diving deep into some bearish patterns, but there's no real point in doing that when we see most everything here is looking bullish. Yes, we lost our short-term ascending trend here, but the confluence based on volume, which is one of the most important indicators, tells us between 3,600 and 3,750, there's a lot of support. So unless Bitcoin really runs sub 116,000, I think Ethereum is going to maintain its 3,600 to 3,750 range. Moving on to a Solana, let's go ahead and see where we're at here. This one is losing some strength. We're starting to see a triangle pattern here. So if you kind of look, you can recognize there is a bit of a, I wouldn't say divergence, but triangle patterns can actually break in both directions, so they're kind of deceiving. But oftentimes they are construed as bullish if you have a nice solid support, which we do. So the truth is 175 to 185 is that support range for Solana. We're right smack dab in the middle of that. This is a support, by the way, mainly because we had previous highs, and previous highs you generally work as new lows. If you can see here, double top, and so far double bottom. So there's a good chance we do see a pivot and bounce from here. It is going to require Bitcoin to do less of what it's doing now and to do more of what it was doing before, which is go up. All right, so let's take a look here at Solana. Open interest, 180 is that area of open interest here for us. That's kind of over the last 7 days, people have probably the most amount of volume applied here in the 180 range. So 180 to 185. Just to clarify too, we have some resistance at 190 to 195 as well. So we're kind of in a range. Oftentimes, unless you want to be a range-bound trader, it's best to wait until the trend here is broken before you consider trading. But the important thing also to recognize, we're at 1.5 billion, which is fairly high for Solana, in liquidation short delta, basically implying there's way more shorts than longs, and generally not best practice to take a long against that. What we want to see though is Bitcoin dominance start to taper off, Bitcoin going sideways, and up preferably, and then of course see how Solana responds to that. Because trading altcoins is all about how they respond to Bitcoin, how they're trading conversely or inversely or consistent, concurrent, however word you want to use to describe it. We want to identify that correlation. And right now, there's not really a great sense here for Solana versus Bitcoin. Because if you look at the Solana chart on the 4-hour, it doesn't look quite as good as Bitcoin's chart, even though Bitcoin's chart is quite messy and fairly ugly. I don't love it. Anyways, we lost our ascending trend here. That is an important thing to recognize. We're under all moving averages, the important ones, the shorter term moving averages on the 4-hour. And then if you look here on the daily, we're still above the 50. That's the 20-day SMA. So once more, confluence, we have slightly more favorable factors here in the support range, and that's kind of an important thing to recognize. We also got our 0.382 fib level, which used in conjunction with other indicators is very helpful, not used solely by itself, as some Elliott Wave theorists seem to believe. So let's go ahead and move on to SUI and see kind of where we're at here and go from there. The summary on a Solana is just that it's kind of doing its thing there. We want to see if that support level holds. It's probably best to wait until that range is broken before you consider trading. So moving to back end here for SUI, let's go ahead and see here. We got strong resistance at $4, supposed to work as a support. But as you can see, look at this here. This is actually a perfect example of how a support level is retested as a resistance. Breaks support, comes back up to retest the resistance. That's where you consider shorting. Okay, hindsight's 2020. I think I was asleep or not really active at that time, but the truth is that's a case in point where you want to consider shorting. Just kind of a good example. Now there's a significant amount of short liquidation delta, almost 1 billion. That's quite high for SUI, and we see most liquidation has been swept. So I would venture to guess that we're about to pivot or bounce here soon, because 360 to 380 is that solid support range for this coin. And if we look at liquidation 320 to 360, that's kind of a wet dream, but it could very well happen. Just really depends on Bitcoin. But if you look at this here, we're establishing higher highs and higher lows still, where most coins are not. So that's a very strong sign. And once more, our previous high working as new low is a very strong likelihood if we see 360. So I'm still leaning towards 360 to 380 being a solid consideration for a long, pending Bitcoin doesn't break its current support range of 116 to 117. All right, so that's the bumper sticker there. Not much else to really note. We're above all moving averages on the daily, and the 4-hour doesn't have any significant divergence. Yes, we lost our moving averages, and we're down below 50 on the RSI. This is standard for most coins, but I've noticed recently you can't really trade solely based on those indicators. I think the back end is kind of telling us that there's a lot less liquidation left, and that the support range should hold. So I would average in between 335 and 360 if we see it. But honestly, here soon, it may be a good consideration to consider a long, just based on the simple fact that we're overextended going into our ascending trend. Generally speaking, you don't want to try to trade against that. That's the same thing as trying to short into support or take a long at resistance. Okay, breakout traders are less successful. They had a good run this last month, but don't think that that is how crypto trading always works. It's not. Trust me on this. You're going to try that same theory and it's not going to work. You always have to remain gelid and move and be consistent with the market. You got to move with the market. You can't just be stubborn and do the same old thing. While certain analysis tricks are helpful and beneficial, you want to be very careful just kind of being a creature of habit in crypto. You got to kind of roll with the punches and identify trends, and that's why we are here to help you identify that together. Speaking of identification, make sure if you are part of our community here and you benefited from the significant prize pool reward for BitUnix, and you are up for grabs for the Apple Watch, I reached out to our affiliate and they're going to send you an email with instructions. You can either choose to take that or the USD value. It's up to you basically, but they will send that to you. That should be an email correspondence. So our contact is available in our Discord, so feel free to reach out to them or reach out to me if you have any questions regarding that. But check them out, folks. They're an awesome exchange, no KYC or VPN required, and links to register is down below. Future reference though, you register for them now, you'll always be eligible for future competitions. Next month, we're gonna have a deposit reward bonus and I think trading futures bonus. Okay, so stay tuned. I'll post that in our Twitter, Telegram, and Discord. So last but not least, XRP, let's go ahead and do this and see where we're at. So first of all, the liquidation delta, this is, okay, we'll talk about liquidation delta. Let's talk about open interest first. We got a super heavy concentration of open interest between $3 and $3.13. It's that super strong support range. In fact, we have a long position open with XRP at this moment, and it's one of those coins that I feel confident in saying that the $3 support range is very strong. Okay, psychologically, but also there's some areas of confluence we've identified previously. For right now, though, there's no doubt liquidation short delta is quite high. It's at 600 million. That's actually low for this coin, but it's about halfway up to what the highest point we've seen before. In other words, 1.5 to 2 billion is generally the concept here of an overextension for liquidation, and we're halfway there. So bear that in mind. Liquidation long delta is not there. There's more people shorting this coin than taking longs. However, we take a look here, we can recognize most all this local liquidation has been swept. The late longs at 307 just got hammered, and there's not really a whole heck of a lot left. While it's sparse and spread out, it just doesn't make a ton of sense to try to take a short into the support range. So if you are in a short, consider securing some profits. I don't think we're going to see too much more downside, and let me kind of show you why. So the daily time frame, first of all, we are losing our 20-day SMA. So generally, that's unfavorable. I'll side with that. Absolutely. But it's not something to read into. Again, it's kind of an early indication of a potential reversal. We're still over 50 on the RSI. While we are under our moving average, stochastic is starting to bottom out. We're starting to see that overextension play to the downside, that pivot, and money flow index being really close to the RSI. I think we're still in decent shape here. But once more, there's no doubt that you can't sugarcoat the daily time frame. It doesn't look fantastic, but we are above some moving averages, and generally speaking, this range is holding very strong here so far. Let's move on to the 4 hour though, because this is where things get kind of interesting. We do have a divergence, of course, in the 4 hour. We're seeing this on most coins. Once more, that can be very deceiving in the market right now. With our money flow index and the RSI all being under 50, that's generally unfavorable, right? Now, the reason why this is kind of an interesting thing, though, is because this coin is super strong fundamentally, and people just love buying the dips. So unless market makers really take a run at this here, I think there's a solid chance we're going to pivot and bounce here soon. So from a technical standpoint, it's subpar. We're definitely not looking fantastic. So I would just say, generally speaking, outside of my bias towards this previous resistance turn support and just how well this coin is maintaining its current range, there's nothing here that's telling us you should buy this dip. But that's almost the reason why you should buy the dip, because that's just how this whole market is working right now. As soon as things invalidate, the price turns right around. So you got to really be kind of crafty in the market. So if you're getting hammered in either direction, consider joining us in our trading. I've got a trading academy, community, and signals group. There's only 2 days left for my membership bonus benefit. I only offer that once a year, and you can lock in your rate pretty much indefinitely until you cancel. So that is available for you. Link down below if you're curious. But we've been taking, we didn't take a monumental amount of profits yesterday, but earlier last week and late last week, super solid profits. So at this point, just kind of waiting for some of our longs to be to hit their mark. And that's kind of where we're at. So I hope it makes sense. I described it correctly. Please don't forget to like the video, comment below if you get a chance. Let me know your position. And if you're finding benefit, maybe you like this new format. I really appreciate you nonetheless. You're an amazing part of my life. Keep up the good work in your life. And you'll get there eventually, right? It's an awesome gig if you can do it full time. Trust me, I know. Have a good rest of the day. We'll see you in the next one. Take care.